Bad Godzilla movies are actually super fun to watch, some more than others, and oftentimes for the wrong reasons, but fun nonetheless. Like, there were times I legitimately cracked up about as much as the buildings Godzilla stepped on. The legendary character was originally conceived as like a cinematic metaphor for the horrors of nuclear weapons. Having appeared in 38 films as of this recording, what he is and where he comes from really kind of depends on the film you watch. But generally speaking, Godzilla is a prehistoric creature that treats nuclear energy like it's a McDonald's quarter pounder with cheese. Sometimes he fights people, sometimes he fights off other monsters in a sort of anti-hero role. He's like a really good bad guy. To commemorate the 70th anniversary of the first Godzilla movie, and because there just so happens to be a new one out in theaters, I thought it'd be fun to dig into this franchise for a video. But of course, because I'm insane, I couldn't resist putting a little twist on things for you guys. It's been a long time since I talked about a bad movie. Too long, which is why I figured the movies I talk about wouldn't be just any old Godzilla movies. Oh no siree. Godzilla -1, Shin Godzilla, Godzilla vs. Destroya, all highly rated films and considered some of the best in the entire franchise. Psst. I don't want those. Give me the ones from that dark, dusty corner of the film industry, next to Jaws 2 and Terminator Salvation. The ones that have a 50% or below Rotten Tomatoes score for audiences and critics, baby. The ones no one wants to talk about. And like I said at the beginning, you can find spectacle, thrills, and even laughs in each of these movies. But what do they specifically do that I find so much enjoyment in? Well, let's start with the first one that I watched to celebrate this truly epic franchise, a little flick called Godzilla 2000. Despite its low score with audiences and critics, I personally found Godzilla 2000 to be a checklist of awesomeness. It's got aliens, mysterious UFOs, citywide destruction, memorable dialogue.
That sound can mean only one thing. Godzilla. I guarantee it'll go through Godzilla like crap through a goose.
The plot of the movie is that a bunch of scientists find a 60 million year old UFO at the bottom of an ocean trench, which, by the way, is almost as old as the US's current presidential nominees. And like the good scientists they are, they decide to risk humanity's safety and study it. And it's not too keen on that happening. Rather, the aliens inside the UFO need to alter themselves a little bit so they can live in Earth's atmosphere. You could say they're kind of like people from Miami, Florida, trying to figure out how to survive a winter in Chicago. But luckily enough, Godzilla's DNA is just the sort of Eddie Bauer winter jacket they need, because he can heal from anything. And so begins an epic clash between sleek, hyper-advanced alien technology and a charred, blackened, radioactive lizard monster that just lays waste to everything in like a 40-mile radius. The humans, who are just sort of watching this whole thing unfold like a bunch of stunned pedestrians on a sidewalk, do their best to fight back, but their puny ballistic missiles and blue IMAX are about as useless as trying to tear down the Rocky Mountains with a toothpick. And there's something that's just so mesmerizing about the spectacle of all that firepower and all those explosions being channeled at a monster that's just brushing them off like they're mosquitoes. That compared to these titanic creatures, humanity's deadliest is just like a minor annoyance to them. It's also just cool to see stuff go boom. My favorite part of the movie comes at the very end, after Godzilla deep throats an alien monster and fillets him from the inside out with his atomic breath. The humans are watching Godzilla walk away, grateful that he's taken down the aliens, almost suggesting that he's some kind of hero. And then he torches the city as the credits roll, because I guess it's just in his way. I love it, it's genius. It's like a metaphor for how nuclear energy just doesn't care what it destroys. How even in the aftermath of a victory, the horrors don't stop. Doesn't matter who delivered the final blow. So Godzilla 2000, a pretty great time. It ain't Oscar worthy, but if I saw it in the trash, I'd pick it out, put it in the recycling bin. While Godzilla vs. Megalon isn't the bottom of the barrel, which we'll get to later on in the video, don't you worry, it does leave a lot to be desired. This movie concerns an underwater civilization called Seatopia, because it's under the sea. The funniest part about this isn't even the name, it's that this entire civilization looks like it takes inspiration from Caesar's Palace Casino in Las Vegas. You'd think they'd model themselves after, oh I don't know, the sea. Underground nuclear tests threaten to destroy their society, so to get their revenge, they release their beetle god Megalon onto the surface world. To help guide the creature, the Seatopians steal from an inventor, a robot called Jet Jaguar. A robot that looks nothing like a jet, nor a jaguar, and when it flies, it looks like it's falling forward. But fear not, because Godzilla will come to save the day. Wow, that's a little bit different from the last movie. He kind of reminds me of a demented Muppet, like if Oscar the Grouch crawled through a trash compactor and then snorted pin particles. I hate it so much. And look, I understand that this movie was old and that this was the advanced technology of the time, but I don't care. I am not frightened by Godzilla. He's too cute. I want to squish him. And the final fight literally looks like a bunch of disgruntled Disneyland employees brawling in the back parking lot over the last cigarette. It's not just the look of the costumes, the way they move is just so human-like. Godzilla does warm-ups with his arms and everything. That's not what a prehistoric monster is supposed to do. That's how Rocky Balboa warms up for a fight. This movie also needed a lot more smashing stuff, more crushed cars and vaporized buildings, not just running around in an open field. Annihilating blades of grass, it just don't hit the same for me. And one last thing I want to mention, when you're listening to these guys fight, it's like someone took their roars, put them on a keyboard, and then just decided on a whim to conduct an annoying as hell monster symphony. Because of the headache I got, I can't say that I had as much fun with this one as I did Godzilla 2000. But little did I know that this next movie would give me an even more iconic song to add to my pole dancing playlist. You'd think of all places, Seatopia would make an appearance in the movie where Godzilla fights a sea monster, but nope. This movie revolves around a band of thieves who steal a boat, wreck it, and then rudely awaken Godzilla from a nap by electrocuting him so he can help them escape the island. You know, real nice guys you can get behind and cheer for. The island they've wrecked on has some bad guys on it, naturally, and they've enslaved the natives to help them grind up lemons which, for some reason, keep this monster Ibera under control because I guess he's got a citrus allergy? Now these natives pray to a giant moth called Mothra to come and save them. And I kid you not, there are entire scenes I tell you, where they're singing their little hearts out. But when Godzilla shows up, it is nothing but a great time. He destroys the evil research base on the island and goes toe-to-toe with the sea monster. The two are practically gods in the sheer power they wield, and they choose to lay waste to each other by playing volleyball. It's just so unexpected and I love it. Godzilla can shoot an atomic beam of pure energy out of his mouth and cook this lobster, but no. He's gotta show off a little before he trudges into the ocean to collect his seafood takeout. The whole thing was definitely a step up from Godzilla vs. Megalon, but it doesn't hold a candle to what ended up being my absolute favorite, which we'll get to later on in this video. It still doesn't hold a candle to the next movie I'm going to talk about either. When you watch this movie, you see a familiar face, Katsuhiko Sasaki. When I first saw him, I was like, that's the guy from Godzilla vs. Megalon, the man of science, one of the main characters. And in this one, he's also a man of science and a main character. Just not that one. He's a completely different guy, which means this actor is double dipping his Godzilla movies. That's illegal. Punishable by up to 10 years of being forced to listen to the natives chant to Mothra on repeat. Fun fact, blasting shitty rap music with your windows down gets you the same sentence, so people need to stop doing that too. This is real, guys, I ain't playing. In this movie, Godzilla fights a mechanical version of himself called Mechagodzilla. And a dinosaur too. But there's something really great about this final battle that just makes it so amazing for me, and that's the amount of explosives there are. It is so intense, it actually lights Godzilla's costume on fire. And the guy inside just keeps on going. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, is a true actor. When not even the threat of melting into the suit lining can make you break character. I also just really like how unhinged they make Mechagodzilla in this movie. He dumps all his weaponry on Godzilla like I spam my Mario Kart power-ups in the last 10 seconds of the race. The sheer action and spectacle really makes this the most fun Godzilla movie of the bunch so far. Until, that is, I took on what's considered to be the worst in the franchise, a film hated by Godzilla fans the world over, a movie that occupies the lowest rung of the Rotten Tomatoes ladder. And this is why I loved it. Godzilla 1998 is, you could say, a special movie in a lot of Godzilla fans' hearts, and I can understand why. It does do some weird stuff to the Godzilla lore. Like, for instance, instead of Godzilla's iconic atomic breath, in this movie he breathes fire? Instead of being a prehistoric creature that was awakened from the nuclear tests in the South Pacific, in this movie he's a mutated iguana set loose in NYC. Instead of feasting on nuclear power to become practically invincible, he's a pescatarian?
That's a lot of fish.
But I can't make a video like this and not reference Godzilla 1998's most controversial change, his design. Instead of paying homage to that familiar look of him standing upright, like how those scientists thought T-Rex skeletons looked before they realized they'd read the instructions wrong, in this movie, they make him look like the updated skeletons. Stooped, tail high in the air, and his claws held in front of him like he's the wimpiest boxer on the planet. In fact, I think that's kind of why they changed his design, because they were going for a more realistic approach and they wanted Godzilla to reflect the latest advances in scientific understanding of what dinosaurs looked like. Either that, or they were just trying to rip off Jurassic Park. Now I know this is going to piss a lot of people off, but the reason I like this movie anyway is because I don't mind when things get changed up a bit. Godzilla 1998, at the time of its release, was the 23rd film in the franchise, coming out 44 years after the first one. That's 44 years of running the Godzilla formula. Everything from the plot, to the characters, to the design. 44 years. So I can understand why the folks behind this project wanted a fresh take. I'm not a fan of all the changes they made. Like, they make it so Godzilla gets called Godzilla because a reporter mispronounces the name.
And it's Gojira, you moron!
But I will say that I appreciate the effort. The second reason that I like this movie is that it's a killer action flick. This movie has a ridiculous helicopter chase where the military does more damage to the city of New York than Godzilla does. There's a pretty horrifying sequence too in Madison Square Garden where these giant Godzilla eggs start to hatch and the puppetry behind them is so creepy. What this movie does really well though is it makes you think it's all over. It makes you think the main characters are safe and are about to go out for shawarma together or something. And then bam! They're getting those steps in on their pedometers again. My favorite moment is at the movie's end when Godzilla's head shoots up through the road and tries to swallow the car Ferris Bueller and his friends are trying to drive away in while they're still inside it. This is great stuff. At the end of the day, I appreciate this movie for trying to be different and shamelessly admit I had a lot of fun with the action sequences. It's why I decided to rate it the best of the worst. Not my favorite of all the movies, I want to add. We've still got a ways to go to get to that one, but it's up there. However, even in all its glory, it doesn't quite have the imagination of this next movie I want to talk about. This film, interestingly enough, is a Godzilla movie that technically doesn't feature Godzilla, or any kaiju monsters for that matter, because it mostly takes place in the imagination of a little boy. This kid, to escape his loneliness, fantasizes about going to Monster Island, which is where Godzilla and all the other kaiju share rent together. It's an interesting choice to me that this kid would dream about going to a place where he'd, get stepped on. What elevates this movie for me are some of the fights, which are so freaking funny. Like when Godzilla gets harassed by this giant bird. Or when Godzilla completely falls over because a giant spider sprays him with silly string. This movie's also got a nice moral about standing up to bullies and finding your inner strength. This horrific demon spawn from hell, called Manila, has an arc that parallels The Boys, where he learns to channel his inner power, atomic breath, something all kids should aspire to do, by the way. However, despite its charm, this movie does something horribly offensive. It reuses footage. I'm not talking about a flashback sequence. I'm talking about the fact that this movie tries to pass off a very familiar volleyball tournament as if it's happening for the first time, and I ain't buying it. It's kind of ironic, really. For a movie that's centered inside an imagination, it actually lacks it in some places. And that's not as much fun. This movie isn't the worst, mind you. This movie didn't make me want to gouge out my eyeballs with ice cream scoops and use them as marbles, but it's definitely occupying the lower levels of my ranking. This brings me to a movie I was probably anticipating the most because I had an absolute blast with the remake that came out back in 2021. Its source material turned out to be on another level, just not a high one. The plot of this movie is nothing short of hilarious. King Kong is taken off his island because this guy has a genius idea that extracting an unpredictable 100-foot tall ape from his secluded island and bringing it all the way back to mainland Japan, where everyone lives, and putting him on TV will boost ratings for his company. Yeah. Nothing's gonna go wrong with that. Meanwhile, a submarine sent to investigate warming temperatures in the Arctic Ocean finds a glowing iceberg in the distance and decides to get a closer look at the thing. A really close look. As in...
Emergency lights.
Now, that's a problem, because it just so happens to be where Godzilla is taking a nap. Poor guy just can't seem to catch a few Z's in these movies, and I haven't even gotten to the most unbelievable part yet. So these two kaijus end up, oh wouldn't you know it, crossing paths and fighting. King Kong actually gets dropped right next to Godzilla with the hopes they'll kill each other, which is about the only thing in this movie that makes complete sense to me. But at the end of the fight, King Kong wins? This giant gorilla defeats an immortal lizard monster that can shoot nuclear explosions from its mouth. What they do is make it so electricity supercharges King Kong's strength because... why the hell not? King Kong can't be an electric type. He looks nothing like a Pikachu. In my ranking I've got going here, I would throw King Kong vs. Godzilla somewhere in here. And that was it. At long last, after 7 movies, I had finished every poorly rated Godzilla film in the franchise. But then I had a thought. The newest Godzilla movie that's come out, what sort of inspired this whole video to begin with, it isn't just a Godzilla movie, it's a Godzilla and King Kong movie. And just last year, in 2023, King Kong celebrated its 90th anniversary since the first movie, an anniversary I didn't participate in. So here's the worst King Kong movies. King Kong 1976 is a retelling of the classic tale that captured everyone's imaginations when the original came out back in 1933. This time with the dude. The plot of this movie is a bit more updated than the original to better reflect the times. The folks headed to King Kong's island do so not for the mystery and thrill of the place, but because they're convinced there's oil beneath it. I can only assume this was done to give the oil industry some much needed representation in film, since it's been lacking. There they find some nasty natives and a giant gorilla whose inner beast becomes tamed by a beautiful woman kidnapped from the crew and and offered to him as a sacrifice. And that classic iconic theme is exemplified in several incredibly awkward ways, like when King Kong blows her. Tries to undress her. And stares at her in the creepiest ways possible. Don't watch this one with your parents, folks. But similar to Godzilla, once King Kong gets taken to a city and starts to run amok, it's cinematic dynamite. People are getting stepped on. There's this one bit where Kong picks up a train, grabs someone, and then flings her aside like a discarded Barbie before flipping the train off the tracks. I love it! Maybe I need therapy. I'm almost not even creeped out when Kong finds his beautiful female friend and watches her through the bar window like the psychotic stalker he is. And when Kong's killed at the end, the way they focus on his slowing heartbeat almost makes me feel bad for the guy. He was torn from his home, and all he wanted to do was find what he loved, no matter how many idiotic humans he had to murder to do it. It's a watchable remake to the 1933 classic. Wish I could say the same for the 1933 sequel. Son of Kong is the second movie ever in the King Kong franchise, and it deals with the aftermath of bringing an ape to New York City to show off and the chaos that ensued. The people who did it running away. Our unlikable protagonists end up making their way back to the same island as the previous movie because they're told there's treasure on it. And what do they find there? King Kong's orphan son. He fights some monsters, they find the treasure, and then an earthquake sinks the island and King Kong's son dies with it. So it's basically just the first movie, just with less interesting themes, an unimaginative plot, and a smaller ape. The only real fun part is when Kong's son fights the other monsters on the island, because it's the only really interesting thing that happens. But strangely enough, it's not the worst of the movies I watched. No, folks. This next one, this is the worst one. Even worse than the worst Godzilla movie. King Kong Lives takes everything that made the first King Kong movie great and hurls it so far into the jungle, not even the earthworms could find it. There's that beautiful theme in the first King Kong movie. Beauty tames the beast. King Kong's rage calms down in the presence of hot women. It's why she's a tiny lady and he's a giant-ass man-eating ape. It makes some visual opposites. But in this movie, King Kong's rage calms down in the presence of another King Kong. A Queen Kong, if you will. Another giant, brutish, destructive ape. It's like it pretends the entire movie before it, and what it was trying to say just didn't happen. They even bring back King Kong from the dead. So that impactful scene where he's shot to death and dies in the streets of Manhattan, it doesn't really hit the same knowing that'll be up to his King Kong antics again, just after 10 short years in a coma, which includes, but is certainly not limited to, getting busy with Queen Kong. And one thing that this movie does that unfortunately pays homage to its predecessor is having scenes that make you uncomfortable in ways you didn't quite know your comfort could be violated. Oh god, just kill me now. The only shred of fun that I get with this movie is that both Kongs, male and female, are played by dudes. Two grown-ass men dressed up in gorilla outfits and flirted with each other, and it wasn't for a kink. A grown man dressed in a gorilla suit and pretended to give birth and was serious about it. This was for art, damn it. Well, in my book, this movie misses what makes King Kong by such a large margin. I give it an F. I hope those actors fired their agents. And that was it. That was the last of the worst rated films in both the King Kong and Godzilla franchises, brought to you by Rotten Tomatoes. Now, I was done. But then I had another thought. Rotten Tomatoes scores aren't everything. I need one more movie, this time from the mind of a real live fan, not percentages scraped off of a website, which, by the way, are only let by the small fraction of people who actually take the time to review stuff. They're not lazy like the rest of us, so they might not even be a good representation of how everyone feels. To do this, I sent my messenger owl out to the biggest kaiju movie fans I know, and I asked them what their favorite bad movie in these franchises was, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is what they chose. Now I want to be clear on something, this isn't a movie they hate, it's simply a movie they claim to love for, quote, all the wrong reasons, and it's by far and away the best of the worst. Overly dramatic acting? Check. A ridiculous plot that's thinner than water? Check. And enough violence to make a Catholic nun faint? Amen to that. Godzilla Final Wars came out in 2004, so it was meant to serve as a sort of 50th anniversary special. Because of this, all sorts of different monsters and even different iterations of Godzilla himself feature throughout the movie. The movie opens in Antarctica, where a submarine imprisons Godzilla in ice after shooting enough missiles to shatter a mountain on top of him. Like, we're not even a minute in, and we're already getting climax level scenes. I'm already expecting 2 hours and 4 minutes of credits, and I'm okay with it. We later learn that in this world there are superhumans called mutants who are recruited to help fight evil monsters all over the planet. A rather marvelous idea, wouldn't you say? But that's something this movie does. It doesn't make humans suck. In most of these movies, everyone else just sort of tries to keep out of the way while these giant monsters try to tear each other apart. The only real way to defeat one is if it gets defeated by another. But in this one, people kick ass. Yeah, the fight scenes are really cartoonish and haven't an ounce of realism to them, but this is a movie where a nuclear lizard the size of a skyscraper exists, so the over-the-top cinematography really kind of fits the craziness of the world they're inhabiting. It's also anything but boring. Over the top is a way you can describe a lot of things in this movie. The action, the fights, even the actors themselves. Like, this biologist is hot as hell for no real reason other than the fact it looks great for the camera. In the movie, some crazy stuff happens where monsters start appearing all over the world. Even, oh, why isn't this surprising? Godzilla from the 1998 movie, who, by the way, absolutely gets obliterated by the Godzilla from this movie. I've read that scene received a standing ovation in Japan. Things get weird though when the Zillions show up, an advanced group of extraterrestrials who all dress like angsty rebellious teens. They take away all the monsters, claiming to come in peace, but surprise, surprise, they just want to eat humanity. I imagine their local In-N-Out burger closed or something. It's a thin plot, like I said. Honestly, I think the Zillions are just an excuse for the humans to reawaken Godzilla from the ice so he can fight a bunch of monsters at once, since it's revealed they're the ones controlling them, and I, for one, am all for it. Everything comes to a head with the superhumans going toe-to-toe with their cartoonish, over-the-top fighting style with the Zillions, and they both eventually transfer their energy to the monsters outside so that they can finish the war. Godzilla wins and humanity mostly dies. But there's still a few survivors, so it should only take a couple thousand years for them to rebuild. And that's Godzilla Final Wars for you. It's a ton of fun because it's not afraid to hold back. There's plenty of action, the humans don't suck, and now I've got another fantastic soundtrack to jiggle my shake weight to. Okay, bye now.